All right, let's dive right into one of the biggest ideas in language learning. It's called the noticing hypothesis. And really, it gets at a huge question. How do our brains actually turn all the language we hear into something we actually know?
I mean, think about it, right? You could live in a foreign country, you could binge watch a show in another language. You're literally surrounded by it, but you don't just magically absorb it all. So what's going on? Why not? What's that secret ingredient that flips the switch from just hearing something to actually learning it?
Okay, so to really unpack this, we first need to get on the same page about a really important concept, and that's input. Now, in linguistics, input is basically, well, it's everything. It's all the language that's out there in the environment around you. The conversations you overhear at a cafe, the song lyrics you listen to, the text on a street sign. It's like this giant sea of language that you're constantly swimming in.
So, where did this whole big idea come from? Well, this wasn't something cooked up in a sterile academic lab. Nope. It actually all started with a very personal aha moment from the guy who came up with the theory. And that guy is Richard Schmidt. So picture this. It's the 1980s, and he's in Brazil trying his best to learn Portuguese. He's doing all the right things, right? He's taking classes, he's immersed in the culture, but like so many of us who've tried to learn a language, his progress just felt kind of random. So he decided to do something really cool. He basically became a detective of his own learning process. So what he did was he kept this super detailed diary, and as he went through it, he found this amazing pattern. He realized there were certain words or grammar structures in Portuguese that had been floating around him for months. I mean, he was hearing them constantly. But, and this is the key part, they only started showing up in his own speech after a specific moment where he consciously noticed them. Like a little light bulb went off in his head, and he connected that specific sound or word to what it actually meant. And this discovery led him to a really powerful conclusion. He basically boiled his entire experience down to this one simple but honestly revolutionary sentence. Nothing is learned unless it has been noticed. That's it. It's such a bold statement, isn't it? It puts our conscious awareness right at the heart of how we learn. And just like that, his personal insight became a formal theory. What the noticing hypothesis says, in a nutshell, is that you simply can't learn a piece of a language until you first become aware of it. That little act of noticing is the spark. It's the essential first step that kicks the whole learning process into gear. It's that moment your brain goes, what's that thing I just heard? And then it can actually start to do something with it. Okay, so how does this actually work? A really great way to picture this whole thing is to think of it like a funnel. You've got this massive amount of language coming in at the top, and this process filters it all down into what you can actually learn and use. Let's break it down into 3 simple steps. First, you've got the input. Remember, that's everything, all the language you hear and see. Then you have the most critical step, noticing. This is where your brain actively flags something, like, hey, I haven't seen that before, or, oh, that's how they say that. And only after that noticing happens does it become intake. And intake is the good stuff. That's the part of the language your brain is actually processed and can now start to learn from. Yeah, this really highlights the huge difference between the two. Think of it like this. Input is a giant fire hose of language just blasting at you. You can't possibly take it all in. But intake? Intake is the small cup of water you actually manage to catch from that fire hose and drink. See the difference? One is just being sprayed with language. The other is what actually starts the learning. So this means noticing is the bridge, right? It's the active filter. You can almost think of it like a bouncer or a gatekeeper for your brain. It's the thing that decides which little bits of all that endless input get a VIP pass to become useful, learnable intake. If you don't have that gatekeeper working, all that language might just wash right over you without ever sinking in. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, right? But now for the practical question, for all the learners and teachers out there. How do we actually do this? How can we get better at noticing? Or even better, how can we make it happen more often? Well, the good news is researchers have actually figured out a few things that really boost noticing. For one, there's just plain old frequency. The more often you see or hear something, the more likely you are to eventually notice it. Makes sense. Then there's something called perceptual salience, which is just a fancy way of saying how much it stands out. And of course, there are the more direct methods, like when a teacher points something out to you or when you have to complete a task that forces you to use a specific word or grammar rule. Those are super powerful ways to trigger that aha moment. And here's a perfect real-world example of that. It's called input enhancement. It's a really simple but clever idea. You know when you see a word in a textbook that's in bold or italics? That's not just for decoration. That's done on purpose to make a specific grammar point or vocabulary word pop off the page, to grab your attention. They're basically engineering that moment of noticing for you. But, as with any big, influential idea in science, it's not the end of the story. The noticing hypothesis kicked off this huge debate that is still going on today. And the core question is noticing everything? Is that conscious awareness really necessary for all types of learning? Because a lot of researchers push back on this. They argue for the power of something called implicit learning. Their idea is that our brains are just these incredible, unconscious, pattern-detecting machines. They believe we can and do learn a ton of language subconsciously just from being around it a lot. Kind of like how a little kid learns their first language perfectly without a single grammar lesson. So this really sets up the two big camps in this whole debate. On one side, you have Team Noticing, who says awareness is the essential gateway. You gotta notice it to learn it. But on the other side, you have Team Implicit Learning, who believes our brains are doing all this heavy lifting in the background, just absorbing these super complex patterns without us ever realizing it.
So who's right? Well, the truth is, it's probably not an either-or situation. It's very possible that both sides have a point, and the real answer depends on what you're trying to learn. It makes sense that you probably have to consciously notice a new vocabulary word to remember it. But what about those really subtle, super complex grammar rules? Maybe, just maybe, our brains absorb those more implicitly, just from thousands of hours of hearing and reading the language.
And that really leaves us with the big, crucial question for every single one of us trying to learn a language. When you think about your own experience, can you truly learn a language without paying attention? Can you just absorb it? Or do you have to consciously notice the nuts and bolts to really make progress? It's something to think about, for sure.